Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Green Mind podcast. I am excited to have an amazing guest with me. There are just some people in this universe who transcend like time and space and age and race and everything else. And you got to be in that moment to really feel it. Jim is one of those people. We met up for coffee one time, and it just felt like I've known him forever. And so I had to have him on the podcast. So, Jim, I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, that's awfully kind to transcend time. I love it. Uh, but yeah, I do feel that way. But thank you.
Good. Good. I'm glad I'm not isn't a one-way street and I just feel that way. I'm glad it's both ways. That would have been awkward.
For sure.
um so Jim, obviously you and I are connected together through Andy Cricken, who when I knew Andy, he was the manager of the Camden County Municipal Utilities Authority in Camden, New Jersey. And so you and I didn't really get a chance to interact when we were both in Camden at the same time, but through fate, you are here in Colorado. I'm in Colorado. Andy thought it'd be great to connect us. Andy, as usual, was correct about many things as he is. And so you and I had a chance to meet up for coffee and have a conversation. What has been your relationship so with Andy? Like, how did you know Andy?
Yeah, so I met Andy about 15 years ago when I started working for a ministry in Camden called Urban Promise.
Mm,
And I brought this real love and passion for the outdoors. Started an outdoor club that, as a volunteer, actually, which later became full time ministry for me. Um, and one of my loves has always been paddling, canoeing, kayaking, and I've done that all over the country. And I
mm,
brought that to the inner city with the kids from Urban Promise. And initially, my idea was to get kids out of the city, Leander. And
mm,
I'd taken students to the Everglades, to Maine, to Assateague Island. And if you know anything about Camden, for those that don't, it's a city surrounded by water. I mean, in some ways, it's an island with two
mm.
tributaries that run into the Delaware River right across from the city of Philadelphia. And I started to notice that river and thought, gee, that's something we should check out. And I did so. Um, and it was amazing. I mean, I saw bald eagles and egrets and
Mm,
herons, snapping turtles. Um, so I had taken a lot of pictures of this paddle trip, exploring, rediscovering the Cooper. Brought it into our school. We have the Urban Promise Academy, a small private high school that's part of our organization. And the kids said, Mr. C, that's what they referred to me as, you got to be crazy. There's dead bodies floating in that river,
mm,
abandoned cars, and the like. I said, that's not what I saw. And so then the idea came to me. It was like, well, gosh, hey guys, what if we tested the water? And why don't you come out with me? So we did that. And I really didn't know much about how to go about testing water, what would be the things I'd want to measure or find. Um, and I called Andy Cricken. I introduced myself, and Andy was just, as you know, an extraordinary, wonderful man who has such a
mhm.
huge heart for the city of Camden and the families and the youth. So his lab started helping us to do water testing.
Mm,
That was about 12 years ago. So a lot of history there. And Andy has been an advocate, an ally in helping us with getting access to this river in Camden, as well as with the water testing itself.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, Andy, I don't know what to say. Just want to give a shout out to you. You're an amazing person. I hope you're listening so you get to hear how much we love you. So, yes, I want to talk more about your work with Urban Promise, your work in Camden. But before we get to that, I want the listeners to get to know a little bit more about you. So, I'm going to do a little icebreaker here. One I find to be very fun is what is your favorite spice that you enjoy cooking with?
Oregano.
Oregano. Okay, that sounds great. And what is your favorite dish to make that you would add your oregano to?
Yeah, so anything Italian for that
Yeah.
matter, like
Okay.
pasta, sauces, even seafood for that matter. Cioppino is and actually my wife makes phenomenal cioppino, a
Ooh.
seafood stew. Um, but yeah, a little oregano in that goes a long way.
Yes, yes. I learned so much about you in one question, Jim. I love that. That's fantastic. So you talked about Urban Promise kind of being this youth ministry approach, and that you have you said a high school. Is that correct? Or is that
Yes.
that's connected?
Yeah. So, excuse me. We have a K through 12 school in
Mm-hmm.
Camden. In addition, we run after school programs throughout the entire city of Camden,
Mm-hmm.
and also summer camps. Um, Camden's a small city, about 75,000 people, 9 square miles, right opposite the city of Philadelphia, separated by
Mm-hmm.
the Delaware River.
Yeah. And one thing that's interesting about Camden specifically is that, and I don't know if these stats still run true, but I remember when I was there quite a while ago, it was, in that like top three most violent cities in the United States. I don't know if it still, is up at that rate or if it's lessened.
It may be the top 10.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
has been some improvements in the city in recent years,
Yeah.
but often one of the poorest, one of the most violent cities
Hmm.
in America. That is
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. So it also, I think, what I guess what I'm getting to there is just to kind of show the importance and the need for us to elevate these communities, to give them more than what they have and the resources that they've been given. It really handed to them because they've been, for whatever reason, cut off from resources and don't have the ability to access certain resources, which may cause certain communities to get into certain activities that are, tend to be violent and high crime. It's not because these people want to be high crime or violent people or, in poverty, right? There's reasons why this has happened to this particular city, and there's this whole history within Camden to further some of these really unfortunate activities that are happening in Camden.
Mhm.
Eh,
Yeah, Leander, you don't understand the Camdens in this country of ours without
mhm,
really recognizing systemic structural racism,
mhm,
which is really the cause. And my love, my heart, again, as I shared, is the outdoors, but also young people. I've
mhm,
been working with young people for over 30 years and through a church, and now my work at Urban Promise. Um, and they don't choose to be in Camden. And
mhm.
uh, but yeah, it's
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. No, I understand completely. And so I think I really appreciate it. So maybe let's go a little bit more into the history of Urban Promise. There's a connection, like you said, to religion. And what type of religion are we talking about? And when we talk about religion specifically, and then maybe your pathway to even getting to Urban Promise to begin with.
Yeah, so Urban Promise began in Camden 1988 in running summer camp programs that have evolved to where we are today. Um, and strong focus on youth development. We're a Christian, non denominational organization. We're all inclusive. Not all of the young people in the ministry that go to school or in programs are necessarily Christian. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I would share that those of us on the staff, it's our faith that called us to Camden to do the
Mm-hmm.
work that we do. Um, Urban Promise is an international organization today based on the model that began in Camden. We're in 25 cities in the United States and
Mm.
Canada. We're international. We're in Central America, South America. We're in Africa, Malawi,
Wow.
Liberia, Kenya, Uganda. Um, it's an extraordinary organization. The founder, my dear friend, Dr. Bruce Main, is still very involved with the organization.
Hmm.
Um, and I started as a volunteer. I was a business owner for about 25 years in South Camden, or excuse me, in South Jersey, about 15 miles outside of Camden, but a world apart.
Mm.
And I started to volunteer, and I was in my early 50s at the time, and I remember, thinking, my God, if I could do this the rest of my life. I just really felt a sense of calling,
Yeah.
and my wife affirmed and supported
Mm.
me, and we, started this program called Urban Trekkers, which is where it began, and I modeled that after a program up in Maine that I had learned about.
Mm.
The cool thing, we do annual treks to Maine, and the kids from inner city Camden connect with these kids from rural Maine who come from fishing families, lobstering.
Mm.
Um, and uh, it's this incredible experience of seeing these two groups of young people that look like they have nothing in common. And they spend a week together kayaking, hiking, evenings around a fire, talking about their lives, and you find out they have more in common than not.
Yeah.
Um, but that's kind of been my journey these past 17 years now.
Mm.
Um, and I'm 70 years old, and people say, "Well, why aren't you retired?" I can't imagine not doing what I do, to the point that I commute from Denver to Camden.
Yeah.
Uh, COVID kind of clipped my wings a bit, but
Sure.
got both vaccines under the
Ah,
arm now, and
congratulations.
started traveling again.
That's good. There's so much that you said that I wanted to like even think about and address. I mean, one, this idea that there's an international like there's chapters internationally in other countries that were based off a model in Camden, New Jersey. Like, I don't think people really understand like the amazing piece of what you just said there. Something that started in a city, an urban city, where you would never think to find this concept of maybe engaging around nature. Like, that's not where you expect it to be, like in Camden, New Jersey. Yet it sets the mold and sets the model for all of these amazing activities happening across the United States and across the world, from a place like Camden, New Jersey, where people, I think, just wouldn't. It's like you wouldn't expect a flower to grow right in Camden, New Jersey, and yet it's laid its seeds all across the entire globe now because of its origins with urban promise in Camden.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. We have a fellows program where every year we bring over some of the brightest young people from Africa who come and spend 2 years with us in
Mm.
Camden. Also, Wilmington, Delaware, which is another site of Urban Promise. They'll spend 1 year really studying our model, working in our programs, coming alongside of us. And then their second year, they spend at Eastern University, right outside of Philadelphia, getting
Mm.
master's degrees in nonprofit management,
Wow.
either starting or going back to ministries that were in existence now for some time with us. Uh, and we've started a similar program for Latin America, based out of Honduras, where we do the
Hmm.
same thing. We bring young people into the Urban Promise Honduras for a couple of years, and then they go and start the ministries in their home countries.
Wow. Wow. It's really powerful and amazing to be providing the skill sets to these diverse individuals to give them an opportunity to see what it looks like to have a career in this field in some way. And I think that, as a little sidetrack here, I talked to a lot of conservationists and big organizations who are like, well, there's no staff, there's no people of color, there aren't enough of them, there's no pool of candidates for us to pull from, because we just can't find them. We don't know where they are. They're just not as engaged, or they haven't gone through training, so that we can't hire people. And yet here you are training people left and right and giving people access and resources, in a way that if conservation groups were able to tap into those resources, they could really like, oh, there actually are fantastic leaders in this space, maybe we need to be more inclusive, and then they would be welcomed here in this space and have an opportunity to work with us more directly. But it seems like you are, and your group is trying to at least build a pipeline of individuals who are engaged in some way in the environment and hopefully can use those skill sets for larger environmental organizations, assuming that those organizations are inclusive and willing to accept these kind of new individuals in the fold. So that's why we talk a lot about like justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. The inclusion part is getting them into the door and having them stay long enough for them to actually contribute in a meaningful way where they feel safe contributing.
No, that's an excellent point. Our leadership community in Camden is made up of 7 people. I am one. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and 3 of those individuals grew up in the program. We're what we once
Wow.
called camp kids and or street leaders, teenagers that we hired to work with us in those summer camps and those after school programs. Uh, just earlier today, Leander, one of my students who's just finishing up her freshman year at Rowan University in environmental
Mm-hmm.
studies, we just hired her for the summer to lead our river guides.
Mm.
The 8 students who we hire that do guided history, ecology tours on the tidal Cooper River
Oh my goodness.
with the
That's
wooden
amazing.
with the wooden boats that we build. We
That's
have a
right.
wooden boat building program,
I was
canoes
waiting
and
for you to tell me
kayaks.
about that. I was waiting for you to bring that up. So, yes, let's get into some boats and paddling. What is that all about?
Yeah, so I had mentioned about how we kind of rediscovered the Cooper River,
Hmm.
and I was on a panel early on with another organization that was building wooden boats with kids in the South
Hmm.
Bronx. And I'm not a boat builder, but I just thought it was the coolest thing going.
Hmm.
And went and visited their organization, saw what they were doing. Had a friend who's an engineer, another guy, the math teacher in the school, brought them with me, and we started building our own boats. And once again, we have this river in our backyard. And it kind of led, a really interesting journey in so many ways. Because when we
Hmm.
first started going on that river, there was really no access. I mean, I used to climb
Mm.
over these concrete slabs, riprap, in order to enter the tidal river by the dam. And yeah, I'd scratched the boats. So I started talking to the county division of parks, and the park director at the time, a gentleman by the name of Frank Moran, eventually became the mayor and is currently the mayor of the
Ah.
city. He'll be stepping down, but they cleared us a little beach. And it made it
Mm.
so easy to bring the boats onto the water. Um, and it's been a really interesting kind of journey in terms of just an environmental awareness. We mentioned Andy Cricken, the
Hmm.
CCMUA, and one of the challenges many of our old urban areas have is old plumbing,
Right.
combined sewer outflows, where stormwater, wastewater meet together and when it rains very very heavy, sometimes that gets discharged directly into the river wastewater.
Hmm. And
So
onto the streets sometimes. I've seen the pictures.
onto the streets, where a storm sewer in some neighborhoods in the city of Camden, which are low lying, you can see toilet paper and actual human
Hmm.
waste come floating up onto the street.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's so unfortunate to kind of hear and that's again one of the reasons why you want to test the water and really find out what's going on there. But also, one of the efforts that I was working on when I did live there in that region was looking at green infrastructure and how far
Mhm.
that can go and helping to assist by reducing the amount of water that goes into the system to begin with. Obviously there needs to be gray infrastructure projects like replacement of pipes and updating of pipes, and that needs to happen as well. But then also, where can you use green solutions to do some of that as well? So that's some of the things that I was working on when I was in the Camden area. And so these kids,
That's where we met, by the way,
yes,
briefly, if you recall, building a rain garden on our campus.
that's right. That's right. Absolutely. Yep. That is where we met. And so these kids they're building their own boats. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, so we have a boat shop that's in what was a church, an abandoned church,
Mm,
and it is now the home of Urban Boatworks and the Camden Shipyard Maritime Museum. Um, so we bring in kids from sixth grade through 12th to participate in a year-long, sometimes after school, sometimes in school, with maybe a math teacher, a physics teacher, where they'll build, whether it's a canoe or a kayak type of craft. We have quite a fleet. We've also built these 25-foot long, 10 person Voyager canoes that we use to take out other students, other schools in the city of Camden.
that's awesome. And, so I guess people might question, okay, so what is like the religious aspect of this? Like, how does that all tie into this work that you're doing? Is it that the mission of what you're doing is the bigger part of it, or is it this idea that some people might say, oh, well, are you trying to convert people? Is that the main focus? Like, what do you say to folks when they think about the religious aspect of the overall work that you're doing, how it ties together?
Yeah, early on, one of the first foundations that supported my part of the ministry at Urban Promise, um, and I remember it was a family foundation, regional, and they had never supported a faith-based organization. They had some concerns as to what that looked like. And I remember the founders came to visit me at my office there in Camden. And the very first question was, Jim, how many of your students are Christian? And I said, I really have no idea. That it's not like they have to check off a box to say what their faith is.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, but I do want to share that I think all of us that are in this ministry on the staff, we're all here because of our faith.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, Leander, the way that looks is, uh, I could be hiking with a group of students on the Appalachian Trail, and come evening, we're sitting around the fire. Um, and I am, I don't hesitate to share what my faith has meant to me in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's not about saving kids. I think I've been saved, quite frankly, by the work that I've done. But I share, my journey, my
Yeah.
faith journey. Uh, and, so I think it's that kind, we meet young people where they need to be met. We're a
Mm-hmm.
holistic organization. Um, so, I've had volunteers or people who come in with this mindset of, we're going to save these young people for Jesus. Um, and that's not the approach
Mm-hmm.
of Urban Promise. But we are a Christian ministry, and we don't
Yep.
hesitate to say that. And we do share our faith. I mean, I pray with young people,
Yeah.
and yeah.
That's awesome. I love it. And I personally think that, I don't go into the camp of like Christianity is under attack and stuff like that, right? I don't per se believe that per se. But I do think that we've gotten a little too far in not sharing our religious journeys, our spiritual journeys, and we just kind of like we're hesitant to talk about them now.
Hmm.
But I feel like when we talk to I feel that when I talk to individuals, I want them to bring their full selves into every conversation, into every experience. And for some people, their spiritual journey is a really important aspect of who they are. And so I would hate for them to kind of like not have that conversation around that. And so,
Hmm.
you and I have talked when we're at the coffee shop, like religion and spirituality is a big part of who I am, and it continues to be a big part of who I am today. And sometimes it's difficult to talk about it as like a gay black man. There's like so much stigma and so much like, oh, well, you certainly can't be into religion, right? That's no possible way. I'm like, no, I really am very much into religion and spirituality. It's a big part of who I am, and it's okay to talk about, my journey within that space because it's different for everyone. And I think it's good for young people to at least hear other people's journeys so that they can make decisions for themselves about what they want to do in that space. But when they hear no stories, then they are just kind of left to make up their own decisions without any sort of input from anyone else besides maybe their peers and what society tells them about certain topics.
No, that is well said. I inherited my faith from my family,
Mm,
and it's been a journey for sure. I grew up in the Catholic Church as a little boy,
mm,
and was a Baptist for a while. I think I'm a Presbyterian now, and that I mean, it honestly doesn't really mean that much to me. But
mhm.
my faith is deep, and
Yeah.
this is my calling. This work that I do, and you know, I usually start my day in prayer and I end my day in prayer.
Mm, mm.
It's
I
mhm.
love that. I should actually be better at that. Um, so okay, so here's a question for you. So, you're in Camden, where I would say I don't know what the percentages of African Americans or people of color in Camden. Like it's pretty high, right? I mean, I don't know what the number is.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The Latino Hispanic count is much higher than it was 15 years
Mm,
ago, uh, but it's probably about 51% what we would call African American, and
hmm
another very high percentage of the Hispanic Latino. And then there's a small Southeast Asian, Cambodian, Vietnamese
mm.
population that's in Camden, and a very small white.
Okay. So then my question to you is I think this is all very interesting because, here you are coming in as a white, straight, cisgender male.
Old.
As long as you said it, I wasn't going to say it. Experienced gentleman. And by the way, you're the first white, straight, cisgender experienced male on my podcast.
A
So you are the
minority.
you are the minority on the yes you are in the podcast and probably in Camden as well. Um, but what does that mean for you, like how you grew up and here you are today in the space where you're the minority? Was that a common occurrence for you? Like did you grow up that way? And if you didn't, how did you then transition to a space where you are the minority and people look at you and they know that you're different, or that there's a historical context that people that look like you have actually caused pain and suffering in the space? Like how do you reconcile that and work through that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Leander. So I'm the youngest of seven children, and we're
Mm,
all very close in age. There's a 6 year spread with the seven. There's two sets of twins. My father was a sergeant in the Army, a career he spent. And so we moved around a lot as kids, and we lived on army bases. And the military was one of the most integrated parts
mhm,
of our society. And my father, being a non-commissioned officer, the ranks of blacks, Hispanics in that were very high. So we lived in housing on these military bases.
mm,
And, many times there were like row homes, and our neighbors were people of color.
yeah,
One time on Fort Dix, New Jersey, we lived in this series of row homes. One side was an African American married to a Japanese woman, war brides. I'm going
uh-huh,
back to like the early 1960s.
wow,
And then on the other side of us was another African American married to a German woman, so
mhm,
biracial kids.
yes,
Um, but our dads all earned the same amount of money. They all dressed alike, um,
mhm,
and that was the community I grew up in.
mhm,
Um, so, but at the same time, what was interesting for me in that is, I really didn't understand racism,
mhm,
and I kind of felt like We all have the same opportunity. We're all kind of in the same place. And many of the young people who were my friends during my junior high, senior high years, um, went off to college. My friend Larry down in D.C. is an attorney. My friend Bob in Chicago. These are two, African American guys. Uh,
Hmm.
as an executive. So, but after I left that environment, I went off to college. I spent a little time in the Army myself. I never found a world like that again. Uh,
Mm.
and the how we were separated and segregated throughout America. Um,
Yeah.
and there was a longing for me because of those really close relationships I had as a child, to be with more diverse people.
Hmm.
Um, and that was kind of what I think drew me to Camden. Um, and there I became so much more aware of my privilege, things that I
Mm.
was so clueless about that I never had to give thought to. Asking a person of color, when did you first realize you were black? Or and asking a white man, when did you realize you were white? I never thought about it.
Mm.
But every person of color I've met can tell me that they think about it every day and can, so that's been part of this journey of mine, quite frankly. Um, and again, I've met some of the most extraordinary young people in the city of Camden that I've ever met in my life. I,
Mm.
I don't know how they've kind of survived with all the trauma
Mm.
and challenges that have been placed in front of them.
Yeah.
Um, I remember one time speaking to a woman, and I had used the term, I work with at risk youth. And she said to me, what you really should be saying, Jim, is you work with youth who have been placed at risk. It's an
Mm.
interesting distinction there. And,
Hmm.
um, but yeah, so this old white guy who was in his 50s that started this outdoor club in Camden, um, didn't take long for, I mean, and I was very authentic in
Hmm.
this role that really built relationships. The first kids I worked with are now in their 30s.
Mm.
Um, and I have some of the most meaningful relationships. And some of them have children of their own now.
Mm.
And when I say I was the guy that got saved by going to
Yeah.
Camden, I mean that sincerely.
Mm. That's fantastic. And what would you say to, other, white men who are like hesitant and just like afraid of making mistakes, and so they think it's going to be too hard, and they haven't had experiences, in the past. They haven't recognized their privilege yet, and they're like, well, I want to work with, people of difference, but I know I'm going to mess up, and I'm just too afraid of that.
Yeah, you got to cross the road. You'll never know until you do that. In that boat shop, I have about 20 volunteers, and the majority of them look just like me. They're
Hmm.
a bunch of old white guys, and many of them have been very, very successful in their careers. Business owners, attorneys, dentists. Um, and it's kind of interesting because I remember on a I do these rites of passages for the kids who graduate from high school, a very physical emotional challenge upstate New York, where they do
Hmm.
these 24-hour solos on islands all by themselves. That's another story. But in doing that is the kids really kind of share with us the challenges, the things that made them strong, the things that they want to let go of. And I remember one time around the fire, the boys, there were 5 young men, and none of them had had fathers in their
Mm.
lives. And then one of my friends who was volunteering with me asked them if they'd had grandfathers in their lives, and they had not. And kind of realizing that absence of an adult, of a man, and what that means. So some days I walk in that boat shop and nobody's working, and there's like three or four of these old volunteer guys and these kids, and they're just talking about life. Um, and when I see that happen, you know, to me, I used to say I run a ministry in Camden for 50 and 60-year-old men, and I got a few kids to build boats with them. That's the truth.
Mm,
So there's that
mm,
learning process for
yeah.
all of us, and that's not to say that everybody can fit, um, but we've certainly been able to draw and attract those that do.
Yeah. And I think what I love about the approach that you're talking about here, right, is that yes, you're in that situation, but you are giving back to the community as well. You're not extracting stories, and you're not just taking stories so that you can go home and feel good about yourself. You are also implementing a program to give these individuals better lives down the road, educating them, giving them more resources, giving them more connections. You're not just going into the community and saying, well, woe is you, poor Black people and Hispanic people.
Oh,
Tell us your stories so that we can feel good about ourselves, and then we're out of here. Which happens a lot. Which
yeah,
happens.
no, you're so right. I mean, I've seen it. One story I love to tell, and it was on this rites of passage, and it was the night the kids came off the island, and we're around the fire, and the kids are sharing, and this one young man said to me, Mister C, you've been like a grandfather to me, and when I heard that, it was like, damn, I thought I was like a dad.
Right. Can you give me dad status at least? And then let's not jump right to grandfather. Oh, that's great. That's awesome. But there's obviously there's that wisdom that you associate with grandfathers that you don't even associate with fathers sometimes. So I feel it. I feel it. So what do you think is next for Urban Promise in general? I mean, obviously you've expanded, you're in different countries now. How what is next? Do you just keep growing and expanding and just kind of giving these opportunities to other youth other places? And maybe another question would be, how does it look like in Africa or South America versus in Camden? Like, how different is it?
Yeah. So I've been to Africa. I've been to Malawi. Brought some kids with me as well. As a matter
That's
of fact,
great.
we rode bicycles across the country,
Wow.
300 miles. Uh,
Whew.
I've been to Honduras a number of times. And that model of youth development and bringing adults and kids together. Young people need strong, healthy relationships with adults. Um, and obviously, Leander, in Africa and in those communities, I mean, the needs are in some ways so much greater than they are in America. But yet, there's also some parts to it that I I think we could learn so much
Hmm.
from the relationships, the dynamics of life in these underserved communities. Um, when I mention all of the places that Urban Promise is exists now, um, we don't plant them. Those are organic organizations that become affiliates,
Oh, wow.
and usually it's someone who's maybe done we have a strong internship program where college students post college will come and spend time. Um, so we just started an organization in LA. The young man and his wife who started LA worked in Charlotte, North Carolina for a while.
Wow.
Uh, the gentleman who founded Charlotte, North Carolina 10 years ago did an internship down in Honduras. The guy who started Honduras did an internship in Vancouver, Canada.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
so that's how it's grown, and
Wow,
it's
that's beautiful.
we had this annual summit where we all come together in Camden of all places, and it's extraordinary. What's been exciting for me, because what I brought to the organization was this whole idea around experiential learning
Hmm.
and our environment. So I now have Trekker programs modeled after what we started in Camden in many of our cities.
Wow.
That's been really exciting for me at this stage.
Do you all have like internship programs for adults who are just like, we just want to help you, like we just want to be a part of that whole process? Because again, when we sat down for coffee, I'm like, I'm gonna quit my job. I can see this already. I'm quitting my job. I'm stopping everything, and I'm gonna help out. And I'm like, I can't do that, Leander. It's okay. You can help without having to quit your job and give up everything. How do people get involved or in some way help?
Yeah, I mean, there's such a huge pool of volunteers that work with. I mean, when I mentioned these
Yeah.
20 guys in the boat shop, and there's a few women.
Hmm.
Most of them have been with us for 10 plus years as
Wow.
volunteers. Um, but across the board, whether it's tutoring,
Hmm.
working on facilities and grounds. Uh, Volunteers are such a huge part of the organization. Um, and people are at different stages of life often, and might be a retired school teacher that comes and says, hey, I'd like to assist in your school and work with your science teacher, your English teacher. um, but and that's true throughout the organization. Uh, it's it's good work.
Yeah.
People want to be part of it.
Yeah.
They really do. It's a phenomenal organization. Our founder, Bruce Bain, is a phenomenal speaker, writer,
Mm,
uh, and yeah, it's there's something special there in terms of the community that we're part of.
yeah. Wow. That's amazing. So, last question for you then is, what's next for you? Like, you've got your two COVID vaccine shots. You can get back to traveling again, which is fantastic. Is this like until grave, until death do us part? What are you
Well,
doing?
no, that's a wonderful question, and succession planning.
Mm,
We've are working with some consultants as an organization. Um, Bruce Main is in his late 50s, and he too is thinking about
mm,
what's the future look like. Um, well, I'm a little further along, as I mentioned, in age. And I mean, I'd love to find a person to take on my role as I'm the
mm,
director of experiential learning at Urban Promise. And if anybody listening on the podcast
yeah.
thinks, "Boy, that sounds like a pretty good gig that Jim Cummings has," I'd love to speak with them. But I want to stay with this organization doing the work until my sun sets. Is how I
Hmm.
describe it.
I love
Uh,
that.
Clearly, it's the final chapter,
Mhm.
and the that word that begins with R is not in my vocabulary. God willing, Leanda, I
Uh-huh.
will be able to do this until my sun sets.
Uh, all right, don't make me cry. So it's too early for that. Well, Jim, as I said before, I love what you do. I love the work that you're doing. I want to work alongside you in some way. So if there's a chance for me to volunteer with you doing anything, let me know. I'd be happy to do so. Is there? I assume Urban Promise has a website and other things that people can look up.
Yeah, so I'll recommend three websites.
Okay.
One is urbantrekkers.org. The
Okay.
other would be urbanpromiseusa.org.
Okay.
And the other is urbanpromiseinternational.org.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, so those three websites there, are all based out of the Camden
Mhm.
operation. But when I mention all the different, L.A., Charlotte, Little Rock, Miami, um, Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, Wilmington, Delaware. I mean, if you go to the sites, you'll see all those different locations in those countries. And Leander, I won't forget that you just said, if Jim, if there's any way I can help you or volunteer or be supportive.
Yeah.
We should do coffee soon.
Yes,
Again,
I would love that 100% without question.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
Jim, thank you so much for your time with us. I really appreciate it. I hope the world gets to get more involved in the work that you're doing and the type of work you're doing because it's so fulfilling. And I can't wait to see you again at that coffee shop.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity, Leander. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. Okay.
absolutely.